Hey, I'm Christy. Today I'm going outside to the beach to paint. I'm bringing my paints, brushes, painting boards, water container, palettes, some pencils, my apron, and a sheet to sit on so I don't get sand on all my stuff. It's such a beautiful afternoon. Look at that gorgeous aqua water. I'm quite new to painting outside. I've done quite a bit of sketching outdoors before using mixed media. I've also started a couple of paintings outside before and then finished them off in the studio. Creating a finished painting on plein air is something new to me though. I've been wanting to try it for a long time, so today's the day. I'm going to try and paint as much of this painting as I can at the beach. We'll see how we go. I won't be using oil paints today. I prefer acrylics because of their quick drying time for working outdoors, especially at the beach. Oil paints are a bit more sticky generally, and I want to avoid getting sand caught in my paint. Unfortunately, that means I won't be able to get those beautiful soft blended effects that you get with oils. I really like applying a base color to my panels before I start painting on them. The base color often has some influence on the colors you end up placing on top. I'm applying a pale orange because I'm inspired by the warm afternoon light at the beach, and I think the orange will help to convey that. I'm intending to keep my color palette pretty simple for this painting. I've just got titanium white, cadmium yellow medium, cadmium red medium, and Prussian blue on my palette to start with. I'm only painting on a very small board today. It's 15 by 22.5 centimeters or 6 by 9 inches. I'm not the world's fastest painter by a long shot, and since painting outdoors is quite new to me, I want to keep it as easy and as achievable for myself as possible. I've taken a quick photo of what I want to paint just to help me work out my composition, but it's also a really good record. I've quickly sketched in the composition onto my board with a pale blue pastel pencil. I've sketched in the trees as well just to see if the composition works. I'll ignore the trees for now and I'll just block in the background to begin with. I've kept the composition pretty simple and very cropped, so I don't overwhelm myself with too much detail. I've added cobalt blue to my palette because it's such a great sky color. The sky is simply a mixture of cobalt blue and white and a teeny bit of yellow. I'm using a mixture of Prussian blue and white for the water. I'm adding a bit of water to my paints as I go so that it spreads really easily. I've now added some phthalo blue and cadmium yellow medium for the aqua green water in the middle ground and near the front. So I've now got 3 blues on my palette, the cobalt blue for the sky and the Prussian and phthalo blues for the water. If you saw my last video, you'll know that I've been inspired recently by the Australian tonalist painter Clarice Beckett. She was primarily a plein air painter. Clarice actually died very young when she developed double pneumonia from getting caught in a storm during a painting session. Talk about being dedicated to your art. She was only 48 years old. I'm mixing a warm brown for the rocks using raw umber, which is like a greenish brown, with cadmium red and yellow and a bit of white. I'm painting the shadows on the sand using a pale brown color. I'm now indicating the shadows of the rocks under the water. Here we are on day 2. I only had a short time to paint yesterday because the light changed so quickly. I had about an hour at the beach. Afternoon light is so very fickle, but it's my favorite time of the day. I just love the look of that warm glow you get from the afternoon sun. I need to apply a second layer of paint. I added a bit too much water to my paint yesterday and it looks too thin for my liking. I like the paint to be thicker and more even without such obvious brush marks. I also want to perfect my colours a bit today. I've added chromium green to my palette and I'm mixing it with blue to create this beautiful green tinge of the water in the shallows. I'm repainting the rocks using some darker tones, which is more accurate. I really want to capture that effect of shadows and sunlit areas by creating a strong contrast between the darks and the lights. I'm using lighter tones of brown mixed with white and warm cadmium yellow to create the sunlit areas on the rocks. I've come back home. The light was changing too much. I've still got my palette from outdoors. It survived the trip home pretty well. I want to make some changes, starting with the shadows of the rock shelf under the water. The color isn't quite right. I'm going to finish off the background so that hopefully I can complete the painting at the beach tomorrow. I've used a mixture of yellow ochre and white and a bit of brown to create this beautiful sunlight effect on the rocks. I'm using titanium white with a little bit of yellow added to it for the foam on the waves. Titanium white has a really cool feel to it, like an old-fashioned hospital white. So I often add a tiny bit of warm cadmium yellow or yellow ochre to warm it up a little and make it look like a sunlit white that you'll find in nature, not so artificial. I'm now adding the chop on the distant water. I'm keeping my painting very simple and minimal. Apart from the chop on the water, I'm not adding any details, no sense of textures. I'm just focusing on the tones and the colors, very much like the tonalist painters I studied in my last video. I'll leave a link to that video in the description box below if you want to learn a bit more about tonalism. You can't really see what I'm doing here, but I'm adding a thin wash of Prussian blue along the bottom of the small white brush marks so that they blend in a little with the blue water and they don't look like disconnected white marks sitting on top of the blue. Back at the beach, it's day 3. Some girls have hung their snorkels and bikinis to dry on my tree. I'm just going to work around it. It's all part of working outdoors. I've quickly sketched in the 2 trees with a pastel pencil. There's a bit of wind today. I'm starting with an orange-brown base layer for the trees. I've brought a small stool to sit on today. The last couple of days I've just been sitting on the ground. This is definitely more comfortable, plus it gives me the right height and perspective for painting in the trees. Now I'm laying in all the darks made with raw umber, a bit of Prussian blue, cadmium red and yellow. I'm using my rigger brush to paint a couple of thin branches. Now I want to add some foliage just to give the sense that the trees are alive. I've been here a bit over an hour. The light has really changed now. I've just realized the beach has become really deserted. I'm one of the last people left. I've come back to the studio now. I'm just going to finish off the painting here. I'm starting with the trees. I want to finalize the shadows and highlights on the trunks. At the beach, the light was constantly changing on the trees as shadows were moving across them. That's why it's so important when you're painting outside to take a photo when the light is optimal before it changes. I'm adding some finer branches with a rigger brush. A rigger brush, if you haven't used one before, has extra long brush hairs which makes it much easier to paint thin flowing lines. I'm also using my rigger brush to make corrections to the contours of the branches. I've mixed up the sky color and I've checked it by painting out a couple of small spots along the edge of the painting and allowing them to dry. Acrylics always dry a little bit darker. The trick when you're painting trees is that the trunk needs to be thickest at the base and taper out as you move upwards. Similarly, the branches need to be thickest at the start, where they meet the trunk of the tree, and then gradually taper out. If you don't get this right, then your tree will look slightly off and it makes your painting look much less professional. I want to create a greater contrast between the lights and darks in the trees to get that patchy sunlit effect and really make the trees pop. I think the foliage looks quite fussy at this point, which was not the overall aesthetic that I was going for in this painting. My intention was to simplify in the manner of Clarice Beckett and the tonalist painters. So I'm overpainting the foliage and I'm going to work it up from light to dark to get a more naturalistic effect along the edges. I noticed that Clarice Beckett also did this when she was depicting foliage. I've put in more leaves to get that feeling of a tree canopy located above me. I'm bringing in a bit of sunlight at this side. I'm finishing off by putting in a red-brown mid-tone along the edges of the highlights on the trunks to capture that glowing effect of the afternoon sunlight. Here it is, the finished painting. It's a lot simpler than I would normally do. Normally, I tend to include more detail in my work. In the past, in my plein air sketches, I focused a lot on capturing the textures of the different landscape elements, where here I've largely ignored the textures and really focused on the accuracy of the tones and colors. I wasn't sure at first how I felt about the painting, just because it's quite different from my regular work. But after leaving it for a few days and coming back to it, I think it does have something quite interesting about it. I think all the beautiful curves and diagonals and changes in direction of the tree trunks really helps to bring quite a dynamic feeling to the painting, which makes it interesting. I think the colors work really well. The warm colors of the trees and rocks and sand against the ultra cool colors of the water. It's a lovely contrast. It's quite a hard edge painting compared to Clarice Beckett's work because of using acrylics rather than oils. Ultimately, I think it does capture the feeling of the location and the afternoon light.